How did the most vile Sith Lord in history somehow grow to appreciate the light side of the Force? Greetings again, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. No matter what you call him, Tenebrae, Vitiate, Valkorion, he was undoubtedly one of the most terrifying users of the dark side that have ever existed in the lore, if not the epitome of it. He began his career by absorbing the life of 8,000 Sith Lords and the entirety of his home planet, sacrificing their lives to grant him his own immortality. He then went on to construct a Sith Empire in secret in the unknown, and when the time came, the Empire brought the full power of the darkness to bear as they plunged the galaxy into a decades-long war. This period of time is easily when the Sith Order was at its most prominent, and yet their Emperor, a man of such malevolence that he made other Sith cower at the mere mention of his name, was actually flirting with other aspects of the Force. By the time Vitiate made his full transition into Valkorion, he believed himself to have risen above the limiting doctrine of the Sith, and began to embrace the wider view of the Force, its greatest picture and wide tapestry. And not only this, but his underlings were given absolutely no restrictions on what part of the Force they were allowed to study and explore. So what made such a sinister monster of a person decide that the light was worth pursuing? Worth even integrating into his culture, and the culture of the Empire that he cultivated? Treating it as a weaker side of the Force originally, this is a bizarre choice, but it's the choice that we'll be analyzing today. My friends, it's time to open up another holocron yet again, and to study the depraved mind of Darth Vitiate. But if you too seek knowledge, then crush that subscribe button so that we may endow you with the knowledge of the past and the future. Now, Acolytes, let us open the holocron and access some of that limitless knowledge. In the centuries since the Sith Empire began, Vitiate had become a total recluse. His plan is actually quite easy to state, but nearly impossible to achieve: to bring the galaxy and the Force to bear, to belong only to him. At this period in time, he had handed over control of the Empire to the members of the Dark Council. He rarely spoke to any of them unless to give them specific orders to carry out. Mostly, he would act through the voices of the Emperor. These were hollowed out shells of beings that carried the Emperor's consciousness and his power, and essentially acted as his vessels with which he would conduct his business. For most of the time as a ruler, he wasn't actually running anything, but was rather remaining behind closed doors to study the Force. During his studies, he ended up taking an interest in another project, building a separate empire somewhere off in the unknown, one completely of his own design. This would become what is known as the Eternal Empire, which was based off of the planet of Zakul. Vitiate found an honorable warrior by the name of Valkorion, who was sufficiently powerful in the Force to handle all of the Sith Emperor's power. So the Emperor hollowed out Valkorion himself, and planted a piece of his spirit within the man. So while ruling the Sith, Vitiate was simultaneously acting through Valkorion to set himself up a sort of a savior figure to the hyper-religious Zakulian people, to one day hopefully become their god, building them up as an unstoppable force. His entire purpose for doing this was because their people had an obsession with a strange ancient technology called the Eternal Throne. This was a chair that could single-handedly pilot the entire Eternal Fleet from one location. The Eternal Fleet was an armada of nigh unstoppable battleships, the likes of which the galaxy has never seen before. So while he set up this empire and delved deeper into the Force, he found himself exhausted by the way of the Sith that he had clung to so desperately for so long. The backstabbing, the insurrection, the exclusive focus on the dark side of the Force. Vitiate found it all limiting. He believed it would never create a lasting empire. He watched as his underlings constantly attempted to eat each other, and eventually worked to overthrow him as the Emperor instead of obeying his rule unquestionably. As Valkorion, he decided to shed the limiting doctrine of the Sith and observe how the Force operated elsewhere. You must understand that he desired to literally own the Force. He believed that it was his right to possess it. For Valkorion, power was power, and there was no getting around it. It was useful to him, and therefore, it was worth taking. This was all due to a core character trait of the Emperor. Emotions meant absolutely nothing to him. The way he was born, combined with the horrific rituals that he had executed on himself in order to achieve immortality, had stripped him of all physical and emotional feeling. And it was this flaw that tricked the Dark Lord into believing that he was a god. Having said that, there was something that he did feel: the hunger for power, but also fear of death. This would lead him to greedily taking up as much of the Force as he could, regardless of its alignment. He sought its knowledge to prevent the one thing that he feared: death itself. However, this does not mean that he went for the Jedi inspiration. They were still his enemies, 1, and 2, he still believed them to be ultimately weaklings, and he enjoyed twisting the knife of the dark side into them as much as possible. Vitiate's journeys and what he did while he was absent from being Emperor is a complete mystery, so unfortunately we don't know what exactly he studied, or where he studied, or rather who he studied it from. But while it has been directly stated in the lore, we believe he followed a similar path to another Sith Lord that would follow him centuries later. That man is Jacen Solo. In his time, Jacen would go on a sovereign journey around the galaxy, studying as many Force traditions as he possibly could. Jacen learned esoteric powers in the Force, powers that the Jedi had never even seen before, such as the electrical influencing powers of the Baron Do sages, teleporting himself or objects using fold space techniques, a power he had developed with the help of the Ang-Ti monks. But before some label him as gray, we need to state that Valkorion didn't ever use the light side. He had grown far beyond it, and it was simply elusive to him no matter what he did. He was too corrupted. Utilizing the light would have made him become weak, as the light side would have resisted him. However, we do know that he has studied light side practices, and simply corrupted them to be used as darker techniques. We know of him in the Sith using fold space to teleport. But what happens if there is a strange electrical discharge that almost looks like Force lightning, indicating that they're using the dark side to accomplish it? A light side organization known as the Zazen Shah had said to possess telekinetic abilities which are superior to that of the Jedi. So superior to where their telekinesis is second nature. One of their primary defensive tools is being able to quickly throw up force shields to deflect any sort of physical attack. Valkorion does the same thing when he parried his son's Arcan's lightsaber with repeated use of force shields. But while Valkorion used the dark side, his followers in the Eternal Empire did not. The Knights of Zakul are an order that we would consider to be more gray in alignment. They were a militant army of force-sensitive soldiers that drew their power directly from a connection to their Emperor. Valkorion essentially bestowed upon them the power of the Force by connecting to their spirits, and tethering his spirit to theirs. They themselves were meant to serve the will of the Emperor alone, and this is how they learned to connect with the Force. Valkorion emphasized the importance of a knight exploring their personal connection to the Force as well though, as this is what would make them truly strong, to rise above the Jedi and the Sith. However, he had them disregard the strict codes of the Jedi and the Sith. No area of the Force was deemed too weak for a Knight of Zakul to pursue with their further knowledge, and no areas of the Force were off limits for study, no matter what. However, while the pursuit of unlimited power drew natural comparisons between the Knights of Zakul and the Sith, the Knights were encouraged to share their findings with the rest of the Order. This was done to prevent them from hoarding information to themselves. This was an attempt by Emperor Vitiate to break one of the facets of the Sith that he hated the most, the fact that they did not share their power with the Emperor. This echoes the tenets of the new code that Valkorion fashioned for himself, the code that he called the Limitless Power Philosophy. Adherence to this philosophy made it their life's goal to achieve ultimate power in the Force without concern on where that power was drawn from. To the Emperor, codes and mantras were meaningless to the followers of this philosophy, so long as they used that power for only Valkorion's greater benefit. Some Sith believed that the Zakul Knights were weaker in one-on-one combat because they didn't follow the code of the Sith. That code teaches one how to properly use enough anger to project the dark side, to manifest it. Some time ago we did a breakdown on the Sith code and how it acts as a roadmap towards ultimate power through struggle and overcoming obstacles. We learned how the Sith grow to become so powerful. They treat all adversity as an opportunity of evolution. The entire goal was to become so powerful that one essentially fulfills the prophecy of the Sith Ari. And with that in mind, it feels strange that Valkorion would call the Sith way limiting. We believe that this could perhaps be a result of him gaining nuclear power in the Force, firmly placing himself at the top with no real rivals. He was the apex of Force ability for hundreds of years, and had no sufficient opposition that forced him to evolve. He was the Alpha Predator. In this way, he ended up stagnating for a period. He had realized that there had to be a way to continue growing in his power, even after becoming too strong for normal problems, too strong for Jedi or Sith. Since he believed himself to be a god innately though, there was no normal being that he believed could challenge him. So the Sith way of overcoming adversity, to ripping victory out of an enemy's corpse, meant very little to Valkorion now. This was why he decided that he rose above their way and looked for the larger perspective on the Force, thus creating a new philosophy, the one of limitless power. This isn't confirmed in the lore, but we believe that the Knights of Zakul probably were not as effective at using the dark side in one-on-one scenarios because they hadn't achieved the Sith code the way that Valkorion already had. The Emperor had finished the Sith way in a sense. He had ran their race and had made it to the finish line. He broke his chains, and he could move on to the limitless power section. But for the Sith underlings and the Zakulian Knights, they had not achieved this, and so mixing the light and the dark could be a hindrance to them, rather than innately tapping into unknown power. Having said that, they still dominated the battlefield anytime they faced down Jedi or Sith in open combat. It could all be down to their drive, their connection. What motivates a Force-sensitive can be an extremely powerful tool towards power. The Sith got one thing correct, and that is ambition. Even the Jedi have ambition in the form of conviction. Their conviction is to protect the Republic, to ensure that peace resumes. The Knights of Zakul had the ambition to serve their Emperor, whom they saw as a religious figure that gave them power, and more important, gave them purpose. The ambition of Arcan and Thexan during the Eternal Conquest was to please their father, and so they were able to harness the powers of the light and dark to accomplish those purposes, all because they believed in a higher goal. This is perhaps the core of the limitless power philosophy created by Vitiate. One can use any aspect of the Force that gives them power, so long as they have the ambition to control it. Valkorion's desire was to own the Force itself, to drain all life out of the universe so that he could become a god of nothingness, to rule for eternity unquestioned, leaving no one left. And the fear of being cast down into oblivion, ceasing to exist, kept him alive. The only real threat of Valkorion at his peak was death itself. With this sort of grandiosity in mind, the mantras of the Sith look quite small in comparison to Valkorion. And this was why the most evil Sith in history decided that he appreciated the light side of the Force, the power, and the knowledge that it could offer. Not necessarily tapping into the light side of the Force innately, but rather appreciating its greater wisdom. Valkorion wanted the Knights of Zakul to tap into the dark and the light together to make them as powerful as possible. He was too far corrupted, but that doesn't mean that he could still use the light side of the Force as a tool to seek the dominion that he wanted. In this way, this is truthfully one of the most evil, depraved, and vile things that a Sith Lord has ever done. The philosophy of limitless power, to use the light side of the Force as a weapon to subjugate the innocent of the galaxy, all to promote your ascension to godhood within the Force. And with this, I have a question for you. Do you believe that the limitless power philosophy has any sort of merit? Or do you believe that it is a one-way ticket towards either stagnation, or in the case of Valkorion, utter madness? In a lot of ways, we have to begin looking at Valkorion as something more than a Sith, something even worse. But let us know your thoughts down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for visiting the channel and the archives, and may the Force be with you.